Margaret Hayes had always believed in the power of family dinners. For 42 years, she'd set the table with care, cooked meals from scratch, and gathered her loved ones around her. But tonight, at 68 years old, she sat alone in her modest kitchen, eating leftover soup while her son celebrated without her. Margaret was a woman of quiet elegance. Her silver hair, always neatly styled, caught the soft light from the kitchen lamp. She wore a cream-colored cardigan over a simple blouse, pearl earrings that had been her mother's, and carried herself with the kind of grace that comes from a lifetime of choosing kindness over bitterness. Her son, Daniel, had just been promoted to regional manager at his firm. It was a big achievement, the kind of milestone that deserved celebration. Margaret had heard about it from her neighbor, who'd seen the Facebook post. No call, no visit, just silence. Then, 3 days later, her daughter-in-law, Vanessa, sent a text message. MOM, remember to finish the leftovers in the fridge. That was it. No invitation, no acknowledgement, just a reminder about food going to waste. Margaret stared at the message for a long moment. She typed back simply, "Okay, then." She did something that surprised even herself. She stood up, walked to her bedroom, and began packing her bags. Margaret had met her husband Robert when she was just 23. He'd been a kind man, a devoted father, a faithful partner. They'd built a life together, raised Daniel with love and intention. Robert had passed away 6 years ago, leaving Margaret with memories, a paid-off house, and a heart still capable of hope. She'd welcomed Vanessa into the family with open arms when Daniel brought her home. Vanessa was ambitious, polished, always dressed impeccably. Margaret had sensed something cold beneath the surface, but had pushed the feeling aside. Love meant giving people the benefit of the doubt. Over the years, the slights had been small. Forgotten Mother's Days, cancelled Sunday dinners, Vanessa's subtle comments about Margaret's old-fashioned cooking or outdated furniture. Daniel had grown distant too, always busy, always preoccupied with his career and Vanessa's social calendar. But this felt different. This felt like erasure. Margaret backed slowly, methodically. A few changes of clothes, her medications, the photograph of Robert that sat on her nightstand. She moved through her house, turning off lights, checking locks, leaving everything tidy as she always did. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she needed to leave. Margaret drove to a small motel on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just clean and quiet. She checked in, carried her single suitcase to the room, and sat on the bed feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. She ordered takeout, watched a movie on cable, and slept deeply for the first time in months. The next morning, she treated herself to breakfast at a diner she'd always driven past, but never entered. The waitress, a woman about her age named Doreen, was friendly and chatty. Traveling? Doreen asked, refilling Margaret's coffee. Something like that, Margaret replied with a small smile. Good for you, honey. Life's too short to stay in one place if your heart's telling you to move. Margaret spent the day walking through the small downtown area, visiting shops she'd never made time for before. She bought herself a beautiful silk scarf, deep blue with silver threads. She had lunch at a CF with outdoor seating and watched people pass by. Her phone rang twice. Daniel's name appeared both times. She let it go to voicemail. By evening, Margaret had 17 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. MOM, where are you? MOM, please, call me back. This isn't funny. We're worried. Margaret poured herself a glass of wine from the small bottle she'd purchased and finally listened to the voicemails. The first was Daniel, his voice tight with irritation. MOM, Vanessa said you were supposed to be home. Call me back. The second was Daniel again, this time sounding confused. MOM, we came by the house. Your car's gone. Where are you? The third was Vanessa, and her tone was entirely different. Strained, almost panicked. Margaret, please come home. We need to talk to you. It's important. Margaret saved the messages but didn't respond. What Margaret didn't know was what had happened at her house that evening. Daniel and Vanessa had returned from the celebration dinner around 10:30, both flushed with wine and good food. Daniel had wanted to stop by his mother's house to share the good news, feeling suddenly guilty that he hadn't called her himself. It's late. Vanessa had protested. She's my mother. She'll want to hear about the promotion. They'd arrived to find the house dark. Daniel had a key, and they'd let themselves in, calling out for Margaret. The house was empty, spotlessly clean, as always, but empty in a way that felt deliberate. The leftovers Vanessa had mentioned were gone from the fridge. Margaret's purse wasn't on its usual hook. Her bedroom showed signs of careful packing. She left, Daniel said, his voice hollow. Vanessa's face had gone pale. But where would she go? Then Daniel had seen it. On the kitchen table, Margaret had left the text message thread open on her iPad. Vanessa's message glowed on the screen. MOM, remember to finish the leftovers in the fridge. Above it, in the family group chat, were the photos from the restaurant. Daniel's celebration. The whole family gathered, laughing, toasting. Everyone except Margaret. Daniel had turned to his wife slowly. You told her about the leftovers. But you didn't invite her to dinner. Vanessa had started making excuses, but Daniel wasn't listening. He was remembering all the times Vanessa had forgotten to include his mother, all the times she'd made small, cutting remarks, all the times he'd been too busy, too focused on his career, too eager to please his wife, to notice what was happening to the woman who'd raised him. His mother hadn't stormed out in anger. She'd simply quietly left, and that somehow made it so much worse. Margaret spent 3 more days at the motel. She walked, read books she'd been meaning to get to, and thought about her life. She wasn't angry. Anger burned hot and fast. What she felt was something deeper, a quiet understanding that she had allowed herself to become invisible, that in trying to be accommodating, in trying not to be a burden, she taught people that her presence didn't matter. On the 4th day, Daniel appeared at the motel. Margaret had finally answered his call and told him where she was. He stood in the doorway of her room, and for the first time in years, she saw tears in her son's eyes. MOM, he said. I'm so sorry. Margaret gestured for him to sit. They talked for 2 hours. Daniel apologized, truly apologized, for his neglect. He told her about the conversation he'd had with Vanessa, about the changes they were going to make. I can't undo the past, Daniel said, but I want to do better. I want you to be part of our lives, really part of them. Margaret listened carefully. She'd lived long enough to know that words were easy. Actions were what mattered. I'll come home, she said finally. But things will be different now. Different how? I won't make myself small anymore. I won't apologize for taking up space. And if I'm not wanted somewhere, I won't pretend that's acceptable. Daniel nodded, understanding the weight of what she was saying. The changes didn't happen overnight. Vanessa struggled with having a mother-in-law who was no longer endlessly accommodating. But Margaret held her ground with grace. She started saying no to last-minute babysitting. She made plans of her own and kept them. She joined a book club and a walking group. She traveled to visit her sister in Colorado, something she'd put off for years. When Daniel and Vanessa invited her to family dinners now, she could tell the invitation was genuine. And when she attended, she was treated as an honored guest, not an afterthought. The real turning point came 6 months later. At Thanksgiving, Margaret hosted dinner at her house. Daniel and Vanessa came, along with their 2 children. But this time, Margaret had also invited her neighbors, her book club friends, and Doreen from the diner, who'd become a dear friend. Her house was full of laughter, warmth, and genuine connection. He looked around the table. Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just contentment, but joy. The kind of joy that comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to settle for less. Daniel caught her eye across the table and smiled. It was a smile of understanding, of respect, of love that had been tested and had survived. Margaret smiled back. She'd left her house that night months ago, not knowing what she'd find. But she'd found herself, and that was worth everything. Later, that evening, as guests were leaving and dishes were being washed, Vanessa approached Margaret in the kitchen. Thank you, Vanessa said quietly, for not giving up on us. Margaret studied her daughter-in-law for a moment. She saw something different now. Humility, perhaps, or just the beginning of it. Family isn't just about being related, Margaret said gently. It's about how we treat each other. I'm glad we're learning that together. Vanessa nodded, and for the first time, the 2 women embraced with genuine warmth. Margaret is 70 now. Her silver hair has a few more grey strands woven through it, but her eyes are brighter than they've been in years. She still wears her pearls, still carries herself with quiet dignity. But now, there's something else too. A strength that comes from knowing she can walk away if she needs to. A peace that comes from understanding that love without respect isn't really love at all. She sees Daniel and his family regularly now, but she also has a full life of her own. Friendships, activities, adventures. She's learned that being a good mother doesn't mean disappearing into the background, and sometimes, late at night, She thinks about the text message. Remember to finish the leftovers. She smiles to herself in the darkness. She'd finished the leftovers, all right. And then she'd walked away from a life where that's all she was worth. And in walking away, she'd found her way back. Not just to her family, but to herself. That, Margaret knows, is the real happy ending.